Almira entered Adrian's family home with the purest of intentions, her heart full of love, and her mind filled with the belief that marriage would be her safe haven. She had grown up in a modest household, raised with values of respect, loyalty, and resilience. When Adrian, the son of a wealthy family, chose her as his wife, she thought it was love conquering barriers of class and pride. She believed that as long as they stood side by side, nothing could shake the foundation of their life together. But from the very beginning, reality told her a different story. Marissa, Adrian's mother, never missed a chance to humiliate her. During family dinners, she would make sly remarks about Almira's parents, their lack of wealth, and their simple ways. She ridiculed Almira's clothes, her accent, even the way she ate. To Marissa, Almira was never good enough for her son. Each insult was sharp, cutting deeper than Almira ever admitted aloud. She would sit at the dinner table, her hands folded tightly on her lap, forcing a smile while her heart bled quietly inside. What hurt her most was not just the words of her mother-in-law, but Adrian's silence. He never once spoke up to defend her, never put a stop to the cruelty. Instead, he sat there, his eyes lowered, as though agreeing that Almira was beneath them. For Almira, his silence was a betrayal even greater than Marissa's words. Yet she held on to hope. She told herself that Adrian loved her, that one day he would find his voice, that their love would eventually soften his mother's heart. Days turned into months, and the cycle repeated endlessly. Marissa would belittle her for being unfit to host guests, sneer at her gifts for family occasions, and whisper to relatives that Adrian had married beneath his station. Every moment in that house became a battlefield, where Almira was unarmed, fighting only with patience and faith. But patience, no matter how deep, has its breaking point. At night, Almira would lie awake beside Adrian, waiting for him to acknowledge her pain, to reassure her that she mattered more than his mother's pride. But he never did. Instead, he rolled over in silence, pretending not to notice her tears. Alone in the darkness, Almira began to feel the weight of isolation pressing down on her chest. Love, the shield she thought would protect her, was nowhere to be found. Still, she clung to the faint light of hope. She believed that if she remained kind, if she endured with grace, things might change. She imagined that one day, Marissa would see her worth, that Adrian would realize the damage of his silence and finally stand by her side. Until then, Almira continued to endure, burying her hurt deeper within herself. What she did not know was that the silence she endured now would one day become the seed of her strength, the very weapon that would transform her from a broken woman into someone unshakable. For every humiliation she swallowed, a quiet fire was ignited within her, a fire that would one day rise and make those who mocked her kneel in regret. One night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Almira woke up to find Adrian's phone buzzing on the nightstand. She reached for it instinctively, half asleep, thinking it might be an urgent message from work. But what lit up the screen was not business. It was a string of affectionate texts, words dripping with intimacy, sent to a woman named Bianca. Her heart thudded painfully as she scrolled further, seeing photos exchanged, promises whispered in digital ink, and confessions of longing that Adrian had never spoken to her in years of marriage. Her hands trembled, the phone slipping slightly in her grip. She felt as though the ground beneath her had opened wide. The insults from Marissa, the indifference from Adrian, they all suddenly connected to this one truth. She had never been wanted. She had only been tolerated. In that moment, Almira was not just humiliated, she was erased, made invisible in her own marriage. The next morning, she confronted him, her voice fragile but steady. She held the phone in front of him, her eyes pleading for an explanation. "Adrian, what is this? Who is she? How could you do this to me?" Her words broke like glass in the air. Adrian, however, looked at her not with shame, but with cold detachment. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he sighed as if she were an annoyance. "Bianca is everything you're not," he said. his tone cutting through her like a blade. "She fits my world. She understands me. You should be grateful I married you at all. Without me, you'd still be living in the slums with your poor family." Almira's lips parted, but no words came. Gratitude? Was he truly saying she should be thankful for the endless insults, the silence, the betrayal? Her chest tightened until she could hardly breathe. She turned away from him, not wanting him to see the tears that streamed uncontrollably down her cheeks. For the first time, she realized that she was married to a stranger, a man who valued pride and appearances more than loyalty and love. When she stepped out of the bedroom, Marissa was waiting in the living room as though she had anticipated the argument. With a smirk curling on her lips, she spoke without hesitation. "Finally, you found out? Bianca is the kind of woman my son deserves. She's refined, from a good family, unlike you." Her words were drenched with venom, each syllable designed to crush Almira further. Instead of comfort, she found mockery. Instead of support, she faced betrayal on both sides. Almira stood frozen, her heart shattering in silence. She wanted to scream, to fight, to demand why love had turned into this nightmare, but her voice was gone. She swallowed her pain, retreating to her room, and locked the door. Alone, she sank onto the floor, clutching her chest as though trying to hold together the pieces of her broken heart. From that day forward, Almira learned how to wear a mask. She smiled at neighbors, she greeted relatives, she carried herself with dignity in public. No one saw the storm inside her. She buried her suffering so deeply that even her reflection seemed unaware of the grief in her eyes. She told no one about Bianca, about Marissa's cruelty, about Adrian's callous words. To the world, she was still the dutiful wife. But in her silence, her heart cried louder than ever, and her soul quietly began searching for a way to survive the cage she was trapped in. And though she did not yet know it, this unbearable betrayal would one day become the very reason she would rise higher than they ever imagined. The day would come when her silence turned into power and her tears into fire. The evening began like many others in that house, heavy with tension. Almira had prepared herself mentally, bracing for Marissa's sharp tongue, but nothing could have prepared her for the cruelty that unfolded that night. The dining table was full of relatives, distant cousins and uncles who had come for a formal family gathering. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but it was the kind of laughter that excluded her, a cruel symphony that made her feel small. Marissa, sitting at the head of the table with the confidence of a queen, decided to make Almira the evening's entertainment. She mocked the way Almira spoke, imitating her accent, making everyone laugh. She sneered at the food Almira had ordered for the dinner, calling it cheap and tasteless compared to what Bianca could provide. Then, with a chilling smile, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "My son deserves better than a charity case. He married pity, not pride." The room fell silent for a moment, all eyes turning to Almira. She sat frozen, her cheeks burning, her throat dry, her dignity crumbling in front of them all. She turned to Adrian, her last hope, praying he would finally speak up, that he would tell his mother to stop. But he didn't. He simply lowered his gaze, his silence louder than any insult. When the dinner ended, Marissa stood up and, with a coldness that could freeze stone, told Almira to leave the house. "You've embarrassed this family enough. Take your things and go. We no longer want you here." The words cut through Almira like knives. She looked at Adrian, pleading with her eyes, begging for just one word of defense. But instead of holding her hand, instead of stopping the cruelty, he slipped a folder onto the table. Divorce papers. Almira's breath caught in her chest. She stared at the papers, unable to process the betrayal. "You're really doing this?" she whispered, her voice trembling, but Adrian gave no answer. His silence was a confirmation, a final blow that left her hollow. Moments later, Almira found herself standing at the front door with nothing but a small suitcase, her entire life reduced to a single bag. The laughter of Marissa and her relatives echoed behind her, mocking her as she stepped out into the cold night. The mansion's grand doors shut loudly behind her, as if sealing her fate. She walked aimlessly, her heels clicking against the pavement, her tears falling freely now that no one could see. The night air was cruel, biting at her skin, but nothing was harsher than the storm inside her chest. She carried not only her suitcase, but the unbearable weight of humiliation, betrayal, and abandonment. At the corner of the street, she collapsed onto a bench, clutching the bag tightly as if it could keep her from falling apart completely. The city lights blurred through her tears. Cars passed by, strangers hurried along, no one stopping to notice the broken woman on the bench. For the first time in her life, Almira felt utterly invisible. Everything she had sacrificed, every insult she had endured in silence, had led to this moment, cast out like she was nothing. Her body trembled as she buried her face in her hands, her sobs echoing into the night. Almira's entire world had collapsed. Her marriage was gone, her dignity was shattered. The man she had loved more than herself had betrayed her trust in the most merciless way. She had nothing left. No home, no family by her side, no hand to hold in her darkest hour. In that emptiness, she felt like she might disappear altogether. But deep within the ashes of her despair, a faint spark refused to die. Though she couldn't see it yet, that spark would grow. It would become the fire that rebuilt her life, the flame that would one day burn brighter than all the cruelty she had endured. For now, though, Almira sat alone in the darkness, drowning in grief, not knowing that this night was the beginning of a transformation she never imagined possible. The night she was thrown out felt endless, but by dawn, Almira forced herself to keep moving. Her face was swollen from crying, her steps heavy, but somewhere deep inside she knew she couldn't give up. With no home to return to, she scrolled through her phone until her fingers stopped at a familiar name, Nadia, her old college friend who had once stood by her in better days. With trembling hands, she called. Nadia answered with surprise, and when she heard Almira's broken voice explaining what had happened, she didn't hesitate. "Come here. You're not alone," she said firmly. Within an hour, Almira was sitting in Nadia's small apartment, clutching a cup of warm tea, tears spilling freely as she finally allowed herself to speak her pain. Nadia listened without judgment, offering comfort in the form of quiet presence and a safe place to rest. The first few weeks were the hardest. Almira often woke up in the middle of the night, her chest aching with memories of Adrian's coldness and Marissa's laughter. She felt small, discarded, and lost. But unlike before, she was no longer surrounded by cruelty. In Nadia's home, she found space to breathe. She realized she had two choices: remain broken or start over. With her heart still raw, she chose the harder path, to begin again. At first, survival was all she could manage. She took whatever work came her way. In the mornings, she helped at a small cafe, serving customers with a polite smile that masked her exhaustion. In the afternoons, she assisted at a boutique, folding clothes and greeting strangers who had no idea about the storm she had survived. At night, she typed up documents as a freelance assistant, her eyes stinging from the screen, but her determination keeping her awake. The days were long and relentless, but each paycheck, no matter how small, gave her a sense of dignity she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she wasn't defined by Adrian's wealth or Marissa's insults. She was building something of her own. Every coin she saved, every bill she paid, reminded her that she could stand on her own 2 feet. The humiliation that once crushed her now fueled her resolve. Slowly, her spirit began to shift. Though the pain of betrayal lingered, it no longer defined her. People around her started to notice. Customers at the cafe admired her kindness, colleagues at the boutique respected her work ethic, and Nadia often told her, "You have no idea how strong you are becoming." Almira didn't always believe it, but deep inside, she felt the truth in those words. Months passed, and her life, though modest, began to stabilize. She could pay for her own rent, her own food, her own clothes. The woman who once left a mansion with nothing but a suitcase now stood on her own ground, proud of every step she had taken. Her heart was still healing, but instead of despair, she carried a quiet fire. In quiet moments, when she thought of Adrian and Marissa, the old wounds reopened, but instead of tears, she felt a growing determination. They had tried to erase her, to discard her as if she were nothing. But she was still here. She was breathing, working, and slowly rising. For every night she had cried in silence, she now promised herself a day of triumph. She no longer dreamed of Adrian's love or Marissa's acceptance. She dreamed of standing so tall that they would one day be forced to look up at her. The world that had once mocked her would one day witness her return, not as the broken woman they had crushed, but as someone far stronger than they ever imagined. And when that day came, she swore, they would kneel in regret. Do you want me to move directly into the next turning point? It happened on an ordinary afternoon at the cafe where Almira worked. The place was crowded, and she moved quickly between tables, balancing trays and offering polite smiles. At one corner sat a man in his 40s, dressed simply, but with the quiet confidence of someone who carried authority without needing to flaunt it. He watched her work, not with the gaze of a stranger seeking service, but with the sharp eyes of someone who noticed details others overlooked. When Almira brought him his coffee, he asked her name. Surprised, she answered softly, "Almira." He nodded, repeating it as if committing it to memory. Over the next week, he returned often, always sitting at the same table, observing her. Finally, one evening when the cafe was quieter, he spoke at length. "You're not just a waitress, are you?" he said gently. Almira blinked, unsure of how to answer. He continued, "I can see it. The way you organize, how you handle pressure, how you keep track of everything around you. That's intelligence. That's persistence." The man introduced himself as Daniel Hartono, a respected entrepreneur known for building companies from the ground up. His reputation was something Almira had only heard about in passing, but she quickly realized she was in the presence of someone extraordinary. Daniel then did something she never expected. He offered her a chance. "I have a position at my firm," he said. "It's demanding, but I believe you can handle it. You have something most people don't, discipline born from hardship. That's rare." Almira's first instinct was hesitation. Could she step into such a world after all she had lost? But the fire within her, the one that had been smoldering since the night she was thrown out, urged her to seize the opportunity. With gratitude and determination, she accepted. Her first days at Daniel's company were overwhelming. She entered a sleek office building where everyone moved with purpose, their attire sharp and their conversations filled with terms she barely understood. At times, she felt out of place, as if her past of humiliation clung to her like a shadow. Yet, every morning she reminded herself why she was there, not just to survive, but to rise. Almira worked harder than anyone expected. She stayed late, learning what she didn't know, asking questions when she needed to, and taking notes meticulously. Mistakes came, of course, but she corrected them quickly, never repeating the same error twice. Slowly, her colleagues began to respect her. Daniel, who observed from a distance, often gave her encouraging nods, but he never handed her anything easily. He made her earn it, and she did. Months turned into years, and Almira climbed steadily. She advanced from an assistant to a project coordinator, then to a team leader. With each promotion, she proved not only her competence, but her resilience. She discovered a new version of herself, confident, capable, no longer afraid of being overlooked. What shocked her most was how the world began to change its gaze upon her. People who once ignored her now sought her opinion. Clients listened when she spoke. At industry events, her presence was noted, her name respected. For the first time in her life, Almira felt truly seen, not as someone's wife, not as a daughter-in-law, but as herself. Daniel became not just a mentor, but a reminder that people could still see worth in her when others had tried to erase it. He often told her, You've already endured the worst. That's why nothing can stop you now." Those words stayed with her, echoing in her heart on the days she felt tired or doubtful. From the ashes of her ruined marriage, Almira had begun to build something remarkable. Her life, once reduced to a suitcase on a dark street, was now a ladder she climbed with her own hands. Each step was a triumph over those who had cast her aside. And though she did not yet know it, the higher she climbed, the closer she came to the moment when her past and present would collide. When Adrian and Marissa would be forced to see the woman they had once mocked transformed into a figure they could no longer ignore. Years slipped by, and with each one, Almira rose higher. The woman who had once been mocked as unworthy now walked into boardrooms with her head held high. Her presence alone drew attention. She was elegant, composed, her words measured and decisive. Every project she led became a success. Every company she touched grew stronger. She was no longer dependent on anyone's approval. She was her own force, a woman who had carved out her place in the world with her bare hands. Colleagues respected her, competitors envied her, and the industry began to whisper her name with admiration. Yet despite the applause, Almira never forgot where she had come from. She still remembered the nights of humiliation at Marissa's table, the cold eyes of Adrian when he handed her divorce papers, the sting of being thrown out like she was nothing. Those memories stayed with her like scars beneath fine silk, hidden from the world but never gone. Whenever she looked at herself in the mirror before important meetings, she sometimes saw not only the accomplished woman she had become, but also the broken young wife who once cried on a street corner with nothing but a suitcase. It was this duality that fueled her. Success had given her a crown, but the scars reminded her why she wore it. She told herself that her past was behind her, but deep within, a vow burned quietly. If fate ever brought Adrian and Marissa back into her path, they would not meet the same Almira they once humiliated. They would meet the woman she had become, and they would finally taste the bitterness of the pain they had poured onto her. She did not seek them actively, yet destiny has a way of weaving paths together when least expected. At charity events, she noticed glances of admiration from powerful men who once would have dismissed her. At networking dinners, she saw women whisper about her strength, some inspired, others envious. Each recognition was sweet, but none were as intoxicating as the thought of standing before Adrian and Marissa one day, not to beg for acceptance, but to show them the consequences of their cruelty. Still, she lived her life with grace. Outwardly, she was calm, focused on her work, treating others with the respect she had once been denied. But late at night, when the world grew quiet, her mind returned to the past. She wondered if Adrian ever thought of her, if Marissa ever regretted what she had done. Then she would shake off the thought, reminding herself that regret was not hers to demand. It would come naturally, like the harvest of seeds they had sown with their own hands. Her vow was not one of vengeance filled with shouting or anger. It was colder, sharper. She wanted them to see her thriving, to realize what they had thrown away, to feel shame not because she demanded it, but because reality itself forced it upon them. The day would come when they would bow their heads, not because she asked, but because they could not do otherwise. And so, Almira continued her climb, higher and higher, a graceful figure in the world of power. To everyone else, she was the picture of success. Only she knew that behind the elegance was a woman who had once been crushed and who now carried within her the quiet but unbreakable vow. They would kneel. Adrian had once lived as though life would never betray him. Surrounded by luxury, celebrated by society, and adored by Bianca, he believed his wealth was untouchable. But arrogance is a fragile shield. It began with small cracks, business deals that failed, investments that didn't return as expected. At first, he brushed it off, convinced that fortune would always bend in his favor. Yet one by one, The cracks widened until the empire he had built on pride began to collapse. Bianca, who had once clung to him with sweet words and tender smiles, grew restless. She enjoyed the glamour, the trips, the expensive gifts. But as the money slowed, so did her affection. Arguments erupted between them, ugly and sharp. She mocked his failures, called him careless, even whispered that perhaps he was never as smart as he pretended to be. Adrian tried to hold on to her, promising that things would recover, but Bianca was a woman of appetite, not loyalty. When the mansion grew quieter, when the servants were dismissed one by one, when the cars in the driveway were sold off, Bianca simply packed her things and left, slipping into the arms of another wealthy man who could give her what Adrian no longer could. Marissa's pressure only worsened his downfall. She could not bear the whispers of society, the pitying glances from old acquaintances. She demanded he find a way to restore their name, to bring back the wealth and status they once flaunted. But Adrian, drowning in debts and lawsuits, had no miracles left to summon. He watched helplessly as banks seized properties, as once loyal friends disappeared, as creditors knocked on his doors. The powerful son of privilege was now just a man cornered by his own recklessness. Nights became long stretches of torment. Adrian would sit alone in his nearly empty home, staring at the shadows on the walls, remembering the days of plenty. Sometimes, when exhaustion overcame him, he thought of Almira. He remembered her quiet presence, the way she endured his mother's cruelty without complaint, the way she had once looked at him with hope in her eyes. He realized then how he had thrown away the one person who might have stood by him even in ruin. But regret came too late. He had chosen pride and betrayal, and now he was left with nothing. The man who had once been admired for his wealth now carried only shame. His clothes no longer fit the part of a successful businessman. His face was marked by sleepless nights and endless worry. Marissa still clung to her arrogance, scolding him, blaming him for every failure, but even she could no longer hide the fear in her eyes. They had mocked Almira as poor and unworthy, yet now they were the ones trembling at the prospect of losing everything. As Adrian's empire crumbled into dust, he grew hollow, broken not only by financial ruin, but by the weight of his own choices. He had lost Bianca, he had lost his wealth, and most painfully, he had lost the one woman who had once loved him purely. Now, all that remained was the bitter taste of downfall and the shadow of a reckoning he did not yet see coming. The grand ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, filled with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. It was the kind of evening where power mingled with wealth, where appearances meant everything. Adrian and Marissa, though stripped of much of their fortune, had forced themselves to attend. Marissa insisted they show face, desperate to cling to whatever scraps of reputation they still had. Dressed in clothes that looked finer than their finances could afford, they walked into the gala carrying the weight of pretense. But their fragile dignity shattered the moment the host announced the evening's guest of honor. All eyes turned to the entrance, and there she was, Almira. She glided into the room on Daniel's arm, her gown a vision of elegance, her posture radiating the kind of confidence born not from privilege, but from battles won against despair. She no longer looked like the timid woman they had mocked. She was commanding, luminous, the kind of presence that silenced whispers the moment she appeared. Adrian's chest tightened as he saw her. Memories of her standing quietly at family dinners, enduring his mother's insults while he said nothing, came rushing back. He saw her eyes now, steady and clear, and it struck him like a blade. She was everything he had destroyed and everything he had lost. Marissa, beside him, stiffened. Her lips curled in disbelief, but the trembling of her hands betrayed her shock. She had always told herself Almira would fade into nothing after being cast out. Instead, Almira had risen higher than either of them could ever dream. Whispers began to ripple across the hall. "Isn't that Adrian's ex-wife?" someone murmured. "Look at her now." She's incredible." Others turned to glance at Adrian and Marissa, their eyes filled with unspoken judgment. The once proud family who had scorned Almira were now the objects of quiet pity and ridicule. Almira did not seek them out, but the moment her gaze brushed across the room, she saw them. Her eyes lingered for only a second before she turned gracefully back to her conversation with Daniel. She did not need to shout or confront. Her very presence was enough to make them feel the weight of humiliation. Adrian felt his throat dry, his palms clammy, as though he were standing exposed under the light of every chandelier. Throughout the night, Almira was celebrated. Business leaders praised her achievements, philanthropists admired her generosity, and Daniel proudly introduced her as not just his colleague, but his partner in building a future. Every applause that rang in her honor was another strike against Adrian and Marissa, who sat in the corner, shrinking into the shadows. For the first time, Marissa could not summon words of mockery. She felt the burn of shame in her chest, realizing that the woman she had called unworthy now commanded the respect of the very people she had once tried to impress. Adrian, meanwhile, could barely meet Almira's eyes. He wanted to approach her, to say something, anything, but the weight of his betrayal chained him in place. The gala ended with Almira delivering a speech, her voice steady, her message full of grace and resilience. She spoke of hardships, of rising from struggles, of never underestimating those who seemed small. She never mentioned names, but every word was a mirror held up to Adrian and Marissa. The crowd applauded thunderously, while the two of them sat in silence, drowning in humiliation. By the time Almira left the hall, escorted with admiration and respect, Adrian and Marissa were left behind like remnants of a forgotten story. They realized then that their downfall was not just financial. It was complete, sealed by the success of the woman they had once tried to destroy. The downfall came faster than Adrian and Marissa could endure. Creditors hounded their doorstep, lawyers sent endless letters, and the last of their properties were stripped away in auctions. Their names appeared in newspapers not as figures of prestige, but as subjects of scandal. Failed investments, unpaid debts, a legacy of arrogance crumbling to dust. Marissa, once so proud, no longer dared to walk through crowded streets. Adrian, haunted by sleepless nights, found himself staring into emptiness, wondering how quickly fortune could betray him. When there was nothing left, no wealth, no allies, not even Bianca to soothe his ego, they realized there was only one person who could possibly save them. The thought tasted like poison, but desperation leaves no room for pride. And so one morning, they went to Almira. The journey to her office was humiliating in itself. Gone were the days when they would arrive in polished cars with servants opening doors for them. Now they came in silence, worn clothes hanging loosely on their tired frames. The receptionist looked at them with polite curiosity, then led them into a room far grander than any office Adrian had ever owned. When Almira entered, the air seemed to shift. She wore power like a cloak, elegant yet unyielding. Her gaze was calm, but behind her eyes was a strength carved by every tear she had once shed. Adrian could not hold her stare for long. His knees gave way almost instinctively, and before he realized it, he was kneeling on the polished floor. "Almira?" His voice cracked, fragile with shame. "I was wrong. I should have defended you. I should have loved you. Please, help us. We have nothing left." Marissa, who had once ridiculed her at every opportunity, now fell to the ground beside her son. Her pride collapsed completely as she wept at Almira's feet. "Forgive me. I was cruel, blind. I didn't see your worth. Please, don't let us be destroyed." Her sobs filled the room, the same mouth that once spat venom now choking on pleas. Almira looked down at them, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, broken only by their begging voices. She remembered vividly the night she had been cast out with only a suitcase, the cold sting of Adrian's words, the mocking laughter of Marissa. And now, here they were, broken, stripped of everything they had once used to humiliate her. She did not raise her voice, nor did she gloat. She did not need to. Power was already hers. Slowly, she spoke, her words calm but sharp. "Do you remember the night you told me I was nothing? The night you laughed while I walked out with no home, no dignity, no husband? That night, you ended any right you had to my kindness." Adrian bowed his head lower, his tears falling freely. Marissa clutched at the hem of Almira's dress as if holding on to the last thread of survival. But Almira gently pulled away, her composure unbroken. She turned, walking toward the window, gazing at the city skyline she now commanded. When she spoke again, her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of justice. "I don't need revenge. Life has already given it to me. You kneel now not because I asked, but because your choices led you here." Adrian sobbed, his body trembling, while Marissa covered her face in shame. They had come seeking mercy, but what they received was a mirror of their past reflected back at them. Almira did not curse them, nor did she embrace them. She simply left them there, on their knees, swallowed by their own regret, while she walked forward, her head high, her silence louder than any scream. The tables had turned, and the lesson was clear. The woman they once crushed had risen beyond their reach. Power was hers, and they would live the rest of their lives tasting the bitterness of their own undoing. Almira stood in the center of her office, the weight of the moment pressing in on all sides. Adrian and Marissa were still on the floor behind her, broken figures of desperation, but she did not turn back to look at them again. There was no satisfaction in seeing them beg, no thrill in their collapse. What she felt was something deeper, something sharper: freedom. For years, their voices had been the chains around her neck. Adrian's silence, Marissa's insults, the laughter that followed her humiliation. But now those voices were powerless. They had no hold over her anymore. As she walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step felt like the sound of her liberation. The staff outside watched in awe as their boss passed by with her usual elegance, as though nothing unusual had happened inside the room. They didn't know the details, but they sensed the gravity of it. Almira didn't explain. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. Adrian and Marissa remained behind, weeping into their own shadows. They had once believed they could define her, reduce her to nothing. Yet here they were, undone not by her vengeance, but by their own choices. The punishment was not her hand striking them, but the undeniable truth that she had soared while they had fallen. As Almira stepped into the elevator, she caught her reflection in the mirror-like doors. She no longer saw the timid wife who once hid her tears in the dark. She saw a woman forged by betrayal, tempered by hardship, and crowned by resilience. The scars she carried were not marks of shame. They were reminders of battles survived. They were her crown, invisible yet unshakable. Outside, the city stretched before her, alive, bustling, full of endless possibility. She breathed in deeply, as if drawing strength from the very air. She thought of the years she had been silenced, told she was unworthy, discarded like she was nothing. Now, she needed none of them. Her revenge was not cruelty or fire. It was the grace of walking away without bitterness, of thriving without needing their downfall as fuel. And so she moved forward, her silence becoming the sharpest blade of all. It cut deeper than any insult, more final than any curse. Adrian and Marissa would live with the memory of her walking away, calm and untouchable, while they remained shackled to the ruins of their pride. For Almira, the story was no longer about them. It was about her, about the woman she had become, the life she had built, and the dignity she refused to surrender. She had turned pain into power, scars into strength, and silence into the most unyielding form of justice. And as she disappeared into the glow of the city lights, her final truth echoed silently within her. She no longer needed their love, their approval, or even their apology. She had already won.